Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Stuff That Chris Thinks. I'm sorry for the echo here in the gym, but we wanted to talk about this picture on the wall that depicts the parable that Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan. For as long as our human species has been asking questions, one of the questions that we've asked over and over again is, why do bad things happen to good people? I don't know if this fella on the road in the parable of the Good Samaritan was a good person, so to speak, but certainly something bad has happened to him. You see the blood, he's got a bruised eye here. Around the globe and throughout history, so not just Christian people, but our species has answered this question, why do bad things happen to good people, in a few ways. Some of us have said that, well, there's no God at all. Things are kind of random chance. And so some days the luck of the draw is bad things happen to you, even if you've tried to be a good person. Some people around the globe and throughout history have said, yeah, God exists, but the God that you imagine is not a personal God. He's more like, or it's more like a force and interested in things like balance. So God exists, but sometimes bad things just happen and don't take it personal. Other folks around our globe have said, yeah, God exists, and God is a personal God, so we can relate to him, but his mercies are selective. So sometimes you are on the receiving end of his mercies, and then sometimes people aren't on the receiving end of his mercies. And to be fair, sometimes, in fact, Christians have held this position, even though it's not particularly what the Bible speaks to us about God's character and God's disposition to the suffering of this world. Having covered all that, what is the biblical answer to why do bad things happen to good people? And the truth is that the scriptures don't quite answer that question. We see in the book of Job, Job turns to God and in a long soliloquy more or less says, why does all this happen? We have been upstanding people. And God's response to Job kind of puts Job in his place. God says, why do you talk so much when you know so little? This is in Job 38, by the way. You can look it up, Job 38. Why do you talk so much when you know so little? And then God says, were you there when I created the Leviathan? And basically God is saying to Job, I don't have to give you an answer. But, and this is very important, just because the scriptures don't answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people, it doesn't mean that there is no response from God. And in fact, we see one of God's response in this parable of the Good Samaritan. Something bad has happened to this poor fella on the road to Jericho, and the Christ figure in this parable is the person of the Samaritan. The Samaritan actually cares. The Samaritan gives something of himself to help the injured individual on the road. The Samaritan pays for the individual's healing at an inn. The Samaritan has compassion and suffers with the fella who's had a bad day here. And we see that this person is a Christ figure. Christ himself in Scripture is called Emmanuel, who is God with us. Why do sometimes bad things happen in this world? Well, God doesn't necessarily owe us an answer, but he has expressed his solidarity in the person, in the witness, in the character, in the presence of Jesus Christ. Both, in fact, the Old and the New Testament represent God's character as one who very much sincerely cares about the affairs of his creation and the affairs of humanity. God doesn't just care because he has a principle or for philosophical reasons it's important to care, but he cares for his creation because he actually sincerely cares. In the person of Jesus Christ, he has expressed his care. In the prophets of the Old Testament, God represents his heart of love and compassion time and time again in the prophet's speech, and in the prophet's action. And in one part of the Old Testament, Jeremiah 7, God addresses his people who come to worship him on the Sabbath, but their lives are filled with non-caring actions about the things that God cares about. This is what God says to them through the prophet Jeremiah. Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers? God is expressing to his people that, you can worship all you want. You can go through the actions and practices of worship. But you are not really worshiping me if you don't know me and you don't express that in your care for others. I was thinking about God's care and his presence within our world recently, and I come down to the library and picked this book off the shelf. It's by a fellow named Abraham Heschel. And Heschel is a Jewish theologian. His mother and his 4 sisters did not make it through the Holocaust. And as a result, he spent much of his theological career thinking about the care and the justice of God. And one of the books that has moved me as Heschel has thought about the care and justice of God, and I have thought with Heschel about the care and justice of God, is the prophets. And I want to read you a small excerpt here about what God is doing as the prophets of the Old Testament speak. It's page 6 if you are nerdy like that and want to follow along eventually. Heschel says this: prophecy is the voice that God has lent to the silent agony, a voice to the plundered poor, to the profane riches of the world. It is a form of living, a crossing point of God and man. In the prophet's word, God's heart is raging. Hey, we've snagged Peter once again, everyone. Tell us about the compassion of God. In any capacity. Sorry, that's very open-ended.
It's very big. So tell you about God. So, what God's love. If you want to start there. So God is a compassionate God who cares about those who are lost. And I'm not using that specifically in spiritual terms. There are any number of ways to be lost. And I think that that's a condition, a human condition. So the person who is drifting in life, God cares. The person who is children who are starving, God cares. When we feel alone, abandoned, God cares. And God uses people to reach to us in ways that are unexpected sometimes, and from unexpected voices. And unexpected. So let me just give you one tiny little example.
Yeah.
Okay? We received an email late last week from a woman. I want to say where in town they live because that'd be too much revealing, but not connected to us, who thanked us for our bills.
That's cool.
Because our bills give them, quote, encouragement and hope. So so God's compassion reaches through our bills. So I think sometimes we think that God's compassion must be a big thing, a gigantic thing. But I think that God reaches us with compassion that's human-sized, like hearing a hymn that moves us and reminds us, like obviously with this woman, or the quiet hand on the shoulder, or the person who reaches out and makes a phone call. All those are God's compassion. And God's compassion is also seen in feeding one child at a time. We don't feed 1,000 children at a time.
Well, we do. But
No. Seriously, we don't go out and do 1,000 meals. It's one kid at a time who gets served them. That's what I'm trying to say. So God's compassion is delivered on a human level, on a human scale.
Yeah, an idea that floats in my mind, and maybe you can comment, is when Christians care, we represent the care of God.
Right.
Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, and one of the lines is that we become God's hands and feet. I think that that's true. We live Christ's example, that we are God's children, Jesus' brothers and sisters. And so we live that DNA, that spiritual DNA. We remember who we are, people who are the children of God, compassion. So, yeah, we live out God's compassion. So, and I think it's really encouraging because if we live our own compassion, we'd burn out pretty quick. So we need a resource and a strength beyond ourselves. We find that in the God of compassion who comes to us in Jesus Christ and who empowers us by the Holy Spirit.
I was thinking this week about a few ways we could respond to this idea that God actually cares. I still have a job, everyone, so thank you very much. But if I can say, like I've noticed, we'll get a better filming location next time. I've noticed that, like I'm not driving the car, so I don't pay gasoline. I don't take the kids to the zoo or wherever, so we're saving a few dollars there. I don't entertain. We don't buy fancy cheeses. I have a bit of room left in a monthly budget these days that I wouldn't have formally. You'll think of me what you want, but one thing that God has been kind of working on me in is maybe use those extra funds to represent God's care. Do you think that's a faithful use of God's resources, or do you want to speak to that at all?
Well, I think that most of us in the West, and by that I mean Europe, Western Europe, and North America, we are among the well-off. Yes, some of us don't have jobs. I realize that. But most of us are quite well-off. And we have resources to make a difference with. And I think that is one of the ways that, if God is the God who has the cattle on 1,000 hills and owns the wealth of every mind, to quote the song, He shared some of that with us. He was generous with us. Might we not be generous with what He's been generous to us with? If that sentence made any sense.
Yeah. No, that resonates a lot with me. So one response, everybody, is God, like this is between you and the Lord, but just, is there extra money in the budget these days? For some of us who have jobs, there happens to be. So what do you want to do with that? That's up to you. A second thing we were thinking is St. Andrew's sponsors some sort of mission work in Haiti, Nicaragua, El Salvador. We don't put finances behind, but we support people in Guatemala and Cuba. And these are places that, like, food security has become an issue. Next week we're going to pray specifically for these places. Maybe another response is you can join us whenever that YouTube video is posted next week. And not just watch a YouTube video, but like pray along with us for these places that are struggling. And maybe one last response. Do you want to speak to this?
Sure. Heschel's book on the prophets is challenging and interesting. And I would love to have a book club where we bang our way through.
Yeah, and I want to be part of it.
A little bit intense, challenging, push us. But I think that there's real value in reading authors that make us think hard. If I can go off on a little rant here. I think it's sad that sometimes the North American evangelical church has thought the mind doesn't matter. The mind matters. We may not agree with everything we read. But sometimes when I read people I disagree with, it helps me think about what it is I actually believe. Because it forces me to think hard about what is it I don't like about what I'm hearing. And so I need to formulate argument to challenge that. So reading things that just are about my echo chamber is not necessarily good. I need to hear other voices, be pushed, be challenged, and be broadened in my thinking.
We're going to include a link to the prophets in the YouTube description. If you want to just buy it and flip through it, that's great. We don't know when this book study will occur, but sometime you can jump in. Quick word, everyone. It's thick, but this is the honest truth. the first half, like I could sing as I read it, and the second half I could go to sleep. So if you want to be like me, dig into the first half where he gets into scriptures, and then the second half you can shelf for the time being. Okay. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.